How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
This is amazing, because I mean, he sounds like a born teacher right there, right? He was putting you out of your comfort zone, which is such an important part of learning. He's giving you feedback as you were learning. And what do you think made him, was that intentional? Like, did he take you under his wing? Was he like, okay, I'm going to teach this guy?
You know, I was the 13th ranger that was assigned to him. And the first 12 hadn't shown much of an interest in his side of the work and in tracking. And in fact, neither in him. In fact, he had invited all 12 guides before me to his home village. No one had come. And so he was not only, he was losing like confidence in the idea of a diverse black-white relationship, notwithstanding even reaching out and now teaching somebody. The fact that he took the second step is even more amazing. I mean, but I did show an interest in, to answer your question, an interest in him, in his family, in his culture, in his language. And then from there, I think the teacher I unleashed the teacher in him, because he realized, now I'm not a guy that's going to be around for a year or two. I'm here to stay. I ended up staying 23 years with him. So it's, and I think he got a sense of that, and so did I. We realized that this was a new order, a new South African relationship where we were both learning, and the ball just started to roll. And with the victories came more motivation.
I think that's such fantastic advice for anybody wanting to be mentored by someone, is that you never once formalized the relationship. You never once you obviously were put together for that purpose, but you just showed a genuine interest in him, a curiosity. You gave way more than you were taking, and it, like you said, it drew that teacher out of him. Yes,
there was one significant moment about 10 years into our relationship where there were two. One was about 3 years in, when we had a very severe leopard charge, and I managed to stand my ground, and he saw in me that I developed in terms of my bushcraft. We were in a very, very dangerous situation. The second was on a not a tracking level, on a personal level. One day in my old Land Rover, I just felt compelled to apologize to him on behalf of the white people, or my people, for apartheid in South Africa. And I don't know where that came from. I had never discussed it. I hadn't even thought of it. It just came up. And I just said to him, you know what? I must apologize to you. We started to talk about apartheid, more and more, and what had happened to him. And I just thought, that's just, although I was not technically part of apartheid, I have certainly benefited from apartheid. Even today, I benefit. And I felt that I needed to record my heartfelt apology with him. And that made a big difference. And I felt our relationship deepening, and I felt a greater mutual commitment happening as a result of that. But that was non-tracking, but in a weird way, indirectly, it improved our tracking expertise as a team.
What have you learned about black-white conversations, relationships, especially in South Africa, where it's such a recent and raw wound between the races, from talking to Renius?
So all I can say is that wound is open in every single black person in this country, I would think, if I gauge by what Renius says and has told me. And in fact, he's recorded that with me. And our biased, very subtle biased body language responses to black people keep that wound open and festering. And I think the way to start to heal is to learn the language, one way. I also don't think you can say, I'm going to go and form relationships with everybody. If you can find one person and form a meaningful relationship with just one person, that makes a big difference. And I think if every single South African, black or white, did that, we'd be, 50% of the way there.
Yeah, I mean, this this in America right now, right? Very polarized society between Democrat, Republican. Like what you've just said, I think is applicable to so many countries around the world that just, and that idea, that specific idea of just sit down and talk to one person. Like you don't feel like you need to change the whole world or the whole, system. Talk to one person and start there. And you've seen that in this amazing long relationship you have with Renius.
Yes, I think when you commit long-term to a person from a culture different to yours, that's when you genuinely start to learn. And that proximity you create gives you insights that ordinary people that haven't gone to that level of depth of relationship will never get. And you can't get that on a surface level. That requires a long-term investment in a single human being, or that would be my view anyway. That's been my experience.
Yeah. So let's go. I want to go back to something you said earlier about Renius. You said he just knew he had a plan. Like no matter what the guests wanted to do, in fact, whatever the guests wanted to do, he had a plan of like where to start. What does that take? What does that mean?
So I think because he'd been on that patch of land at Londolozi for so long, he had such a good sense of where animals would be at certain times of the year. So, we would be listening to the radio. We'd been taking safaris sometimes for weeks and weeks on end without a day off. And so we'd have a very good idea of what the animals were doing. And his ability to anticipate their leopard's next step. A leopard would be on a kill in south of the Mashabendonga on a baby duiker, and he would remember where she'd come from, and he'd make a prediction of where she was going to go to after that kill. And he was unbelievably accurate there. People often ask, did he ever dream? He never dreamt. Funny enough, I was the one who would dream. I would dream sometimes. If we had a very long stint in the bush, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, I would start to dream, and my dreams were about 50% accurate. Again, I don't know the truth of that, but Ren didn't dream. His was based on logic. Yeah.
When you say dream, you're talking you'd go through where those animals were going that you had spent the previous day with. Is that? I
would literally dream in the night where an encounter with a leopard in a place, and I wake up in the morning. I'd say to Ren, I had a dream. We found the mother leopard at Peaver Pan. And he'd say, let's go. Let's go. And sometimes there'd be evidence of her being there and sometimes not. But it was, we loved the idea of acting on dreams. Playful.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and it goes back to that enjoying the process and just making it fun and being curious and you're testing hypotheses.
Yes. And we had one leopard who we were unusually successful with, the Mangan female. We would track her and find her with a greater success rate than any of the other leopards. And I don't know why. And one day we found her, it was midday, it was hot. She was not a very good hunter. She also was a leopard that did not hoist many of her kills into trees, which was unusual. So eventually when she did kill, she'd get robbed by hyenas or lions. So she was often hungry. And we one day found her in the middle of the day hunting mongoose. And when we found her, she saw us and she looked at us. She kind of glanced back at us and then continued focusing on these mongoose. And at that moment, what we would normally do is the moment we encountered the leopard, we'd walk back to the vehicle, we'd go and get the guests and we'd drive back in. That was the process. But this time, Renier said, no, let's follow her on foot. We were without guests. We dropped our guests off at breakfast because they were getting hot and tired of us being off the vehicle. And often we got bad feedback because we were keen on the tracking and the guests wanted to see the animals. So we had to be a bit careful. And in this instance, we dropped the guests off at breakfast. So they were happy and we went straight back into the bush. And it was hot. And we found Mangan and she was hunting these mongoose. She saw us. She hardly reacted. And Ren said, let's follow her. And for 2 hours, we followed this leopard, Andrew, and we got closer and closer and closer to her. At one point, we were no more than 10 meters from her. She started to hunt a gray duiker. And and we couldn't see what she was hunting. She was stalking through the bush. Eventually, a little clearing became apparent in front of us, about 50 meters in front of us, and we saw the duiker standing there, totally unaware of us in it. And the two of us started to crouch on either side of this leopard, and there was this unusual, unique band of human leopard hunters stalking this
amazing.
small antelope. And she didn't do anything. There was no irritation from her, no growling or anything. And it was at that moment we realized we weren't such good stalkers as a wild leopard. And Ren said, let's move back. And we moved out. Weeks later, we found her in the vehicle this time, and she came out of a thicket, and she was walking eastwards, and we were parked north of her. I remember this like yesterday. And she saw us. She turned on a ticky, 90 degrees. She came straight up to the vehicle. She came past my door, which we had no door, and she started to make like a chuffing sound, like this, and look up at it. It was chuffing. And she walked off, and then she turned back and she continued on her eastward trajectory. When we got back to the camp, I asked all the senior rangers, what is this chuffing, this sound? No one knew. I researched it, couldn't find it. Eventually, years later, I found out that cats will chuff to greet. And John Varty told me that his tigers that he bred from captivity greeted him by chuffing. And so I think she had seen us so many times on foot that she actually started to recognize us visually. And it was just we had an unbelievable, when I've written a story about that, what I've just told you in the book about the Mangin. And that was a most beautiful relationship with the wildest, most elusive big cat on the planet. So if you can form a relationship with a leopard, we can form a relationship with any part of the natural world.
Yeah. Do you believe in spiritual or emotional connections with animals?
I do believe in emotional connections. I'd like to believe in the spiritual connections too, but I can't explain it.
Yeah.
I can only explain how I felt and what I saw that leopard respond to us in. But I'm sure on some spiritual realm, it can be explained.
Yeah. No, I'm like getting like goosebumps, like listening to this story. This is incredible. So, one of the inspirations for this podcast is this Craig Foster's story, My Octopus Teacher, right? And you've talked to Craig, I believe. He wrote I think the intro for your book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He read the book and wrote a very generous endorsement or quote for
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, that I've written a blog about this and that story of that ability where so many similarities with what you're saying about being the effortful practice, just going back every single day to the same place and paying attention and not trying to interfere with the course of nature and just kind of being there connects you in some way with that animal. Yeah, I mean, can you speak to some of that that experience you saw as in Craig's documentary and kind of how you've seen that play out a bit as well? I mean, obviously that leopard story was what made me think of this. Yeah,
so there are two things that come to mind when you ask that, Andrew. The in terms of the effortful practice, I've found and that I've read about violinists and artists that practice a note, playing a note over and over and over again until they perfect that note.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true in tracking. When you follow a leopard's trail once, you will see X percentage of the sign left behind. If you go back and you follow that trail again, you'll see more of it and more and more. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, and in fact, now we use that as a technique at Tracker Academy to teach our tracker students how to follow trails, is we get them to follow the trail 4 or 5 times over without obliterating and immersing yourself and be able to develop an ability to recognize that sign on the ground. Some of it is so obscure. There's a myriad of animal traffic happening. So your leopard that you're following is in competition with all the other animals' signs that have been. Some of them are, the leopard has walked on top of some of the signs, and some of the animals have walked on top of it. So it can help and hinder you, that so-called competition. Ren always talks about the competition. He says, there's lots of competition here today, when there's lots of other things going on. And the easiest track is when there's, you've got only one species and no others of the same species moving around. That's very easy, even in quite hard terrain. But if you've got a whole lot of other movement going on, it makes it a lot more difficult. And the trailing takes the longest to learn. And I find the more and more you do it. I remember following a lioness in high grass, and Renius had done one of these things where he just left me. Oh, another thing he would do is he would say, I'll meet you there, and then he wouldn't be there. He'd say, I'm going to go and check up at that tree there. If we lost the tracks, he said, I'm going to go and check up at that marula up ahead, 300 meters ahead. I'd say, oh yeah, I think I know where that is. And then I'd scout around. Invariably, I wouldn't find anything. I'd go look, they'd be gone. And I wouldn't know where he is. And I have to go back and find and I'd have to follow his tracks to find him. And that was a huge part of my learning, was following and finding Renius. And I would whistle. I'd whistle, and I developed quite a piercing whistle. And he wouldn't whistle. And
was he testing you?
Yeah, he would. Yeah, definitely. He wanted me to find him. And he kept saying to me, "You got to be clever in the bush, and you can't be making a noise. Animals can hear the whistle." Yes. I said, "Yeah, but you can. It'll be easier if I can get to you quicker, because I've got the rifle, and if we're tracking together." He just walk off.
Making you better and better every single day. You talked about in one of your blogs, I think, about Renius said this, has this unbelievable belief in himself. Like he believes he will be successful in every track, right? Where do you think that stems from, and how has that helped him, and how much of that has rubbed off on you as well?
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. It's probably as a child. His father was a very, very severe man, and he put those young boys under tremendous pressure at a very, very young age. To look after a herd of goats or cattle in an area where the big five are all around you as a 6-year-old, often in the half flight, and you've got to get those 30 or 40 cows back safely, in the knowledge that if you don't, you're not allowed to come home. You don't. His father wouldn't allow him to come home, and all of this, and he wouldn't give him food.